The first thing I noticed about the chemicals in foods was this business with preservatives. And the preservative everybody was using in the 70s was ethoxyquin. And ethoxyquin was made by Monsanto at the time. And it was sold about the time of this controversy to Nippon Soda. I thought that was pretty strange. If it was the second largest moneymaker for this famous company, why would they sell it to another company? What is going on here? And I started digging behind. I got back to the mid-50s. And in the mid-50s, there were palatability studies in cats, and there were 5-year survival studies in dogs looking at this preservative. In the cat, they weren't concerned about whether the cats it was safe for them, but they want to know if they'd eat it, because, cats don't always eat foods that you put before them. In the dog study, they had beagles, and they had these huge chain link enclosures. They had the control, first of all, the control kibble. How did they choose that? It wasn't clear. Maybe it was cheap, So they had a group of beagles that were fed control kibble, and they had another group of beagles that were fed that plus ethoxyquin. There was no placebo, really. It was just kibble and kibble plus. Well, they couldn't keep track of the animals, and the chain link housing would break down, and the animals would cross between one group and the other, and they were breeding indiscriminately, mother, daughter, whatever, and there were rats running around and anticoagulant being given, and some of them were bleeding out and whatever. This was a disaster. You could get the study under the Freedom of Information Act, and when you looked at the study, it didn't show anything. And so because the control group had as much pathology and disease as the ethoxyquin group, the conclusion was ethoxyquin didn't do anything. Well, how can you do that? So I said, this is crappy science. So I go back on, the libraries, and I look in the literature, and I find there's nothing about this compound in North America. It comes from Scandinavia, Japan, Czechoslovakia, Poland, where they've been studying it. They're very concerned about these antioxidants without what we call a hydrocarbon tail. Most antioxidants have a tail on them that fixes them to a tissue. So they stay wherever they land. This one has none, so it can swim around anywhere. And just to show that, they carbon-14 labeled some ethoxyquin. They had a ton of feed, they put it on the outside of the ton, and in 6 minutes, the center of the ton was labeled. So that shows you how powerfully this chemical is circulating around the body. What could it be doing? So we have this whole thing, so I started raising a question. They could feed 240 to 250 parts per million of ethoxyquin in pet foods that they eat every day, versus 50 to 100 parts per million in paprika and chili pepper that we don't eat every day. So I started thinking, wait a minute. Toy breed dogs eat more food to sustain their caloric demand per pound of body weight than a Newfoundland. My God, they're getting potentially poisoned by all this chemical. So I started to ask questions about it. Well, eventually, the FDA came out and said the original studies were totally scientifically flawed. So there were no data to show that this was safe. So we started challenging the pet food industry, some of the biggest pet food companies at the time, and I was challenging them, working with some toy breeders who found that their animals were dying, their bitches were aborting, they weren't fertile, they were having liver problems, they were having anemia, hematology problems that I was interested in as a hematologist, and they contacted me. And when we challenged the industry, they said, you have to prove to us that this product is unsafe. Until you do that, we're going to continue to put it in the food. And we said, au contraire. You prove to us it's safe, otherwise we won't eat it anymore. They said, so we didn't eat it anymore. And then there were TV programs like Marketplace in Toronto that interviewed us, and we said that when we stopped feeding foods that had ethoxyquin in it, and we made home-cooked diets, the animals got better. How does that prove ethoxyquin did anything? It doesn't technically prove that, but it proves when you put it into the food, something happens, and the combination of that in the food made very sick animals. And then eventually, and I think it was 1982 perhaps, maybe it was 92, either 82 or 92, the FDA came out with a statement. Ethoxyquin affects the cytochrome P450 enzyme system in the liver, which is the critical enzyme system that detoxifies toxins in the body and drugs and whatever. And it induces a building block of hemoglobin, protoporphyrin 9. And when that happens, your hemoglobin isn't formed, you become anemic. And it affects prostaglandins, and so you can't reproduce and you can't sustain pregnancy and whatever. So it was proven, after the fact, when the courageous dog people, cat people, and people like myself who spoke up, not just me, but others, said, forget it, we're not going to feed this food.